Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. I want to talk about becoming successful owning remote rental properties, being a landlord when your properties are not local to you. It's a good way to combine investing, vacation, and nice weather. You can identify a Sunbelt state, for example, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Florida, and scout for properties in that area with an ultimate goal to relocate there at some point in the future. But let's start at the beginning. When you're early in a landlord career, there's a little bit of learning that goes on. You learn how to screen tenants. The loan type is generally a residential type of loan that's based on your income, not necessarily on the property income, but your income and your credit rating. And generally, you're going to be buying like an Airbnb vacation rental, a single family home, a condo or townhome, or duplex, triplex, or fourplex. Those are residential loans. They're pretty easy to get. They're 30 years in duration, and they're based on your income and your credit rating. So after you've done that, that's the early part of your career, and you've got some equity built up, it can be time to buy something larger. And if you do it strategically, you can buy outside your area in an area that you'd ultimately like to move to. Now, meanwhile, you keep your early properties and you operate one remotely. And so I'm going to explain how to make that work. So on my channel, my very first video, how to turn $40,000 into 6.535 million, that was a remote property. It was not right next door. It was in a different city. It was not in a different state. I want to be clear. It was remote, but it wasn't that remote. It was sort of a gentle introduction to remote landlording. But that was the very first property I bought, and so I learned the ins and outs of what the issues are when you have to, because when something comes up and you have to commute to that property, it requires some planning. It's not down the street. You can't just get in the car and drive down the street. You have to fit it into your schedule. So that was a learning experience. I know people who have owned properties out of state, and they try to do it on their own, and I don't recommend that, and I'll explain why as we go along here. So generally, you started your early career, you have money from the equity in those properties that you can use to buy larger properties like apartment buildings. Generally, these are 5 or more units, and the more units, the better. Generally, you're not going to be getting a residential loan. You're going to be getting a debt service coverage ratio or DSCR loan or a bank statement loan. Those do not rely on your personal income or your credit rating. A DSCR loan is not based on your job, income, or credit. The DSCR loan is based on the property's net operating income. And the way they determine your qualification is they take the net operating income of the property. That's the rent minus the expenses, and they divide by the loan payments that you'd be making. And if that number is 1.2 or better, then you can get the loan. But again, the cool thing about this is your job income and your credit are not the big factor. I mean, they're going to look at your credit, don't get me wrong, and they'll look at your assets, they'll look at your situation totally. But the main qualifier is net operating income, rent minus expenses, divided by the loan payments. They want to see generally a 1.2. I say thereabouts because DSCR lenders, they're not all the same. Some have, I have heard, I don't know with direct experience, I've heard of DSCR lenders going all the way down to 1.0. But if you're that close to not being able to make your loan payments, I don't recommend it. I would try for 1.2 or better. So generally, if you've decided I'm going to relocate to Texas at some point in the future, I'm going to take money out of my early properties, where do you find these? There's a bunch of sources online, loopnet.com, crexy.com, 10-x.com, costar.com, and there are other sources. What you should look up is, if you search online, you should search for commercial residential for sale properties, and you'll find a bunch of sources for that remote area. Because generally, if you're planning to relocate to a Sunbelt state, for example, you need to be able to look at properties in that area, and these are a few ways to look at those. Okay, so let me continue on and talk about the must-haves. So we want to make this work. Now, in your early career, you likely owned a property or properties that were fairly close to you that didn't require planning to commute to. So there are some differences. When you buy remote property, the first thing is obvious. You need enough money to buy 5 or more units. And you need to have, this is a must-have. I shouldn't say need, I should say must-have, a remote location property manager. You should have a property manager managing your asset, because it is an asset, in that location. Not a property manager where you are managing it remotely, but you actually hire a property manager who knows that area to manage your property. Another must-have is a maintenance vendor at the remote location. Now, you can use a turnkey property manager who will provide the maintenance, but there's a caveat there. Some property managers, a lot of them, view maintenance as a profit source for them. They will mark up the maintenance cost to you. If you hire your own vendor, you might be able to negotiate a better deal on the maintenance coverage. There's an incentive with a turnkey property manager if they're unethical, and I've run into this. If the property manager will look for ways to charge maintenance, to find maintenance issues that come up to make money. And so I'm not saying all property managers are like that, but there are some, I've run into it, where the property manager uses the maintenance as a profit source, and so they're motivated, they have an incentive to find things to fix to charge you. So you want to just make sure you've got an ethical property manager if you go this way. A lot of property managers are turnkey. They provide everything. So it's worth paying for that. If you can find a property manager who covers everything, it's a turnkey solution. It's less trouble for you. You really don't have to worry about too much, except traveling periodically to the property just to check in on it and to have a vacation. If you buy in a Sunbelt state, it's a great write-off. I know people who have done this. They bought in a Sunbelt state, and they would commute down for business and write that part of the trip off, and then they would have some vacation time. You cannot write off vacation time, but you can write off the cost of the business travel. So let me make sure I didn't miss anything here on the must-haves. Because to make this work, to make a remote landlord operation work, the must-haves, you really got to follow these. Let me just restate that. If you try to do this on your own, like if you, and I know people have done this, they'll have one resident of the apartment building act as the property manager and do all the maintenance. You cannot really hold those people to account the same way that you can a property manager. The property manager has an incentive to grow the number of properties they manage. They have an incentive to do a good job for you as the customer, and most of them will do that. But a resident that you're giving a discount on the rent to act as your property manager, they don't have that incentive. They're not in business to be a property manager. They're getting usually the way it works is you'll give a resident a cut of a reduction in their rent to act as the property manager and the guy who calls the plumber or the air conditioning guy if something goes wrong. So I know people who have done that. I 1000% don't recommend that. You could try it to find out if you want to, if you're curious. And it can work from time to time. But if something goes wrong, or if that person moves out and you have to find somebody else, you'll end up probably hiring a property manager anyways. And I should say that there are some parts of the country that will require you to have professional property management after a certain number of units. California is one of those states, as an example. So make sure you're aware wherever you buy your property to check that, to see at what point, how many number of units before I'm required by law to have a professional property manager. So these must-haves, they really are must-haves. You should have professional, I would recommend having a turnkey property manager. And that way, they're taking care of the maintenance. It might cost a little more, but it's fewer headaches. So ultimately, if you relocate to that area, you've got an asset there that's making money for you, and you're established there before actually moving there. So it's just a strategy to move from an early landlord career where everything is local and close to you to having a nice weather area to relocate to. As I said, to avoid, these are the things to avoid. You should avoid not having a remote property manager. You should avoid not having a remote maintenance vendor. And like I said, it's possible to remote landlord by yourself, but I don't recommend it. You'll hate it. You'll just, because that first property I bought, it was remote enough that it was a real PITA. That property was a real PITA. Having to plan, having to drop everything and make plans to commute over there to another town to visit that property. So I learned. And this is the way to do it. If you have some equity early on, you identify a remote location, you use an online source to scout properties, you buy something remote, and then you hire people to manage it for you. Property manager, maintenance vendor, or a turnkey solution. That is the way to go for this. And the only other thing I would say is when you do this, you should try to buy as many units as possible, because the DSCR loan, the interest rate is usually going to be, 1.5, 2 percentage points higher than the residential loan that you're used to when you started your career. Because these are commercial residential properties that are more than 5 units. 5 units or greater. These are called commercial residential properties. The expenses are higher. So the more units you have, the more rental income you have. So you should be equipped with enough units in your property to make all the additional, to cover all the additional expenses. And the other thing about a DSCR loan that I want to point out is residential loans generally are amortized over 30 years. That means the payments you make are calculated on a 30-year repayment schedule. And they're also due and payable in full at the end of 30 years. Okay, but commercial residential property loans, DSCR loans, they're amortized. They're usually amortized over a 30-year period. In other words, the payments you make are calculated based on a 30-year pay down of the loan, but the loan usually comes due in 10 years. With most of the time, there's a rollover provision that allows you to roll over the loan into a new loan at the current interest rates. So that can be a gotcha, because if interest rates really spike, rolling over the loan can be an issue. So think about that in terms of how much money you put down on the property. If you put down a larger down payment on this larger property, then you have more wiggle room when it comes time to refinance a DSCR loan. If you have any questions about any of this, I've got real estate experience. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Just post in the comments. And I want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.